Ian Lees-Galloway.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to start my contribution today by acknowledging some of the people who have been involved in the campaign to ensure that home support workers do get paid for their travel time. People like Tamara Badley, who is a member of what was formerly the Service and Food Workers Union, now the E2 Union after their amalgamation with the EPMU, for definitely Māori. And also I want to recognise Jenny Goodman as well, a member of the Public Service Association, who also took a case. And so I want to acknowledge those individuals and other individuals like them, other care workers like them, who have stood up and over years campaigned through a variety of methods to get the government to finally recognise their situation and to finally do something about it. And they were able to do that, sir, with the support of their unions like the Service and Food Workers Union, unions like the PSA. And if anybody seriously believes that unions are somehow irrelevant today, then I would point them to this settlement, because this simply wouldn't have happened if these workers hadn't been part of organisations that were prepared to support them, to take their legal cases, to negotiate with the district health boards, with their employers and with the government, and to actually facilitate everything that needed to happen for the settlement to be reached and for this piece of legislation to be brought before the House. If those caregivers did not have the support of the other workers around them who are also part of that union, this simply wouldn't have happened. And I think that's important for us to reflect on, sir, because unions play a really important role in ensuring that workers are able to negotiate with the government. They do that by working together, and their voices simply wouldn't be heard here in Wellington if it wasn't for those organisations that they are part of. So, sir, this legislation essentially enacts a settlement that was reached between the government and those unions representing those caregivers and the district health boards and the employers to ensure that that time that caregivers have to use travelling from one client to the next is actually recognised as work time. It's not, as Annette King said, it's not some sort of break time. It's not their tea break, although it might be the closest thing that you're allowed to get to a tea break these days under this government. It's not downtime for them. It is part of their working day. And given that their wages are already abysmally low for the time that they spend actually in the home with their clients, in effect it meant that a lot of these caregivers were working for less than the minimum wage. When their entire working day was put together, they were essentially under the minimum wage, and that was largely that was part of the thrust of the case that was taken to the ERA, and as Annette King said, Judy McGregor had already secured a legal opinion indicating that it was more than likely that they had a good case under the Minimum Wage Act, that their remuneration was insufficient to actually meet the minimum standards of that legislation. So as a result of that, the government entered into negotiations, and we have this settlement, which it's fair to say is the result of negotiation. It's the result of some compromise. It's not gold standard, which is a term that's been thrown around a bit today. It's not gold standard, but it is certainly a very significant step forward from the situation that those care workers were in. And I think we need to appreciate here in Parliament, the government certainly needs to appreciate that those workers came to the table prepared to negotiate and prepared to settle at a rate that was financially sustainable for the government. But sir, this is just one aspect of chronic underfunding of the wider caregiving sector. Certainly we know that in residential aged care, the people who provide care, whether they be caregivers, whether they be nurses, whether they be part of the broader health workforce, are desperately underpaid for the work that they do. And the most obvious signal of that is the differentiation between what someone in the caring professions can earn in the aged care sector as opposed to what they can earn if they're working directly for a district health board. And there's no good reason why that gap should exist. And the only reason that gap exists is because government refuses to fund that sector to a level that is actually able to support reasonable wages in that sector. And as I say, those wages are so poor that when these caregivers were not paid for their travel time, then effectively they ended up on less than the minimum wage. So whilst we're addressing this, there's also a range of other matters we need to address. We need to look at aged care. We need to look at what we pay these home support workers for the time that they are in their homes, because it is a policy, I think, of most parties in this Parliament that more people will be supported to stay in their homes for longer, especially into old age. And that's a good policy. A lot of people like that policy. People want to age in their own home. They want to be supported to be able to stay in their own home for as long as possible. And there's myriad benefits, both to the person themselves and to the state for supporting that policy. But we can't do it on the back of slave wages. We can't expect these care workers to subsidise that policy. If we are expecting more people to stay in their homes and we are expecting more of these caregivers to do more work, doing the excellent and wonderful and sensitive work that they do, then we need to actually support them with wage rates that encourage them to take up the job and encourage them to stay in the sector and encourage them to undertake the training that will make them better able to provide the level of care that we ought to be providing as a state. If we are expecting people to live a dignified life in their homes with home support, then we need to ensure that we have a qualified and well-supported workforce and to make it a career that people actually want to stay in and invest themselves in. It shouldn't be the kind of job that becomes a sort of job of last resort. And thankfully, we have thousands of people who are prepared to work in this sector because they feel as though they are making a contribution to their society. But we shouldn't rely on that. We shouldn't take advantage of that. We should actually pay rates that are fair for the work that they are doing. And this is one step in that direction. And I want to, again, congratulate everyone who's been involved in getting to this point. I'll be interested to see, not that I'll be on the select committee, but I'll be interested to see what the submissions are. If any of the submitters believe that the deal can be improved in any way, although I acknowledge that this is the direct result of a matter which has already been settled. But it'd be interesting to see if there is any room for improvement or if there's any way in which we can work with the government to make this settlement any more generous and more appropriate for these workers. But sir, with those thoughts, I just want to reiterate what Annette King said, that we support this legislation and we're looking forward to hearing the submissions.